to congratulate all four teams on making it to the ESL Quarterfinals. On opening government, we have Indonesia A. On opening opposition, we have Gadjah Mada A. On closing government, IIUM A. And on closing opposition, IIUM B. I will let my panelists introduce themselves, and I will, and you will, and then we'll get this whole thing to my left.
I'm Red Shiade.
No preference.
No preference.
Lex, Honorable Chair, Madam Chair, whatever makes you more comfortable. Opening government?
Jessica speaking for she or they.
Kevin speaking second, here day.
Opening op?
Sherman speaking first, here day. Sandy speaking second, no preference.
Closing go?
Speaking first, no preference.
He is speaking second, no preference.
Closing op?
Only speaking first, here it is.
Gadjah speaking second, Indian day.
Okay. Obviously, it is much easier just so that there are no accidents if you favor referring to people by their speaker position, unless you've just written all of those things down. And without any further ado, I invite the Prime Minister to deliver a 7-minute address for the motion that stands in her name.
Panels. For a long time, our community has been exclusive for artists and capital owner in the society. That this attached from the reality that a significant part and portion of society has not enjoying the benefit of art. The problem is money and lack of financial capability for this working class to enjoy art. That creating structural and systematic deterrence for museum and artists to glorify working class in their artwork. This debate is about, as a state, we think in the instances that we want to subsidize art pieces, we should subsidize art pieces that glorify the working class. Because we understand that the moment government decide that they want to subsidize something, government think that is essential and that provides some degree of utility for individuals. So the burden from opening government to win this debate is that if we are able to show you the significance of art and the utility for the people, for the working class in the ground, we win this debate. Now, a couple of models before I proceed to my substantive. First of all, what do we mean by glorifying working class? That means that we glorify the struggle and oppression that working class experience, the struggle that they experience when they live in a suburban, that they need to commute every day, the shitty working place that they need to experience. We also need to glorify the demands about minimum wage and working hours and exploitative conditions in working places. This also includes the call for unity and unionize for these working classes so they are able to unionize and galvanize more support in the current status quo. Second of all, what do we mean by providing subsidies? No, thank you. Providing subsidies means that museums and art galleries that glorify working class are going to be given extra financial incentive from the government. And also, art that we are talking about in this debate does not mean that we are only going to include classical painting or classical literature. This also includes music, in pop culture, in modern culture, because we understand that art exists in a wide variety of world that we live in right now. So we say that's going to be exist in our model, right? We are also going to provide financial incentive for artists that create art that glorify working class. That's also going to happen in our side. The type of government that will most likely pass this policy, the incumbent government that will most likely pass this policy, are government that's already left or center left, right? So they already have this initial ideology or leanings that this working class is an important part of society. So we need to abandon argument for opposition about how the government is, for example, right, that they are not going to enact this policy. That is the prop fiat in this debate, right? Now, let's analyze what makes art an art because it's a form of expression that the artist deemed and deliberately intended to create some sense of experience and emotion and the meaning for the people. This is the reason why art has unique capacity to unify people and form their opinion about something. And this is the reason why the problem that exists in the status quo right now is representation and accessibility. That the vast majority of people and working class are not able to feel and relate to the experiences that's currently happening on art piece. That art piece majority right now is detached by the reality of our capitalistic world right now. But also on the second level problem is that even if there are some artists that have political intention or political meaning to create these art pieces, most likely the working class does not have the capacity to buy or purchase these art pieces, right? So most likely, even if there are some committed artists that already create that in the status quo, most likely people of working class are not able to enjoy those experiences, does not enjoy those types of emotion. But then the question that we need to ask is that, no thank you, is that why we need representation in art? Why art is very important? Because first of all, we say that art has the unique capacity in order to evoke some sense of emotion. Then when you see a painting or when you listen to music, you feel some degree of disgustment to people that you think are oppressed in a status quo. You feel that you are in the same boat with another working class that work in the same working hour as you. So we say that this unique capacity that art has the ability that no other alternative will be able to do so. But then the question arises, why we need to care about working class? There are two layers of importance in my argument. First is that because working class is the majority of the people, that in the vast majority of states, with the context of rampant income inequality in a lot of states that we live in right now, working class is a significant part of the society where majority that the GDP of the country is contributed by the working class and about how they are going to better performance in the economy. But also second of all is because there is still lack of class awareness in working class, that for far too long, working class are oblivious to the existence of partner that they have in against the oppression that they have right now. That also we say that right now, no thank you, working class also are lacking in terms of formal political participation. That most likely because of the circumstances about the economic struggle that they face, they are less incentivized to participate in formal political participation, for example like voting or election, because they think that they don't have enough time for that. I have other priorities and I have other economic priorities to take care about. This is different with art, because art is that you can enjoy it as a form of experience, as a form of entertainment purposes. That's the reason why people listen to music when they commute on back days, because they have just a tiring day, because they need that art serve a unique purpose of entertainment, and that's something that I can enjoy. That's different from reading news. This is different from joining political campaign and conflicts, right? Because this is something that you can treat as an entertainment purpose. I'll take moving.
We agree with half the things you're saying. Closing opposition is not going to trade off the working class. Why do you need to glorify their suffering?
Yeah, simply because in the current status quo, people think that capitalistic is a norm, right? So this is the reason why we need to extend it to the form of glorifying working class, because unless that you glorify it, people will not understand the gravity of it, right? So we say that you need to galvanize more and more support by even over-exaggerating. On OG, we are okay with over-exaggerating the struggle of working class. We are totally okay, because only by then people will understand the real struggle of it, right? Now, I'm going to talk to you about the benefit that you get on OG. There are two main benefits. First of all, is that more intention to join political cause, because they realize something is wrong and this working class feel that something is wrong. This means that more incentive to join labor union, because you feel attachment to the community and you feel that sense of belonging, because you feel that this emotion is something that you need to galvanize support on. But second of all is more happiness and productivity, right? Because you feel sense of validation and affirmation that your struggle is not your struggle alone, but other people understand that you are struggling. This means that you understand that you have other community to support you on, which is the art community, right? Like when they see a painting or listen to music from Spotify Premium in like hard days after commuting, you feel that someone understands your struggle, and this is more happiness for this working class, and this is more productivity. I just told you about how art is important, about how working class is the vast majority of people and the majority of instances they are significant for society. We are very proud to participate.
The Prime Minister for address and then the Leader of Opposition.
it is undebatable to protect the laborers and the working class. That's not the debate. We agree we ought to protect the labor. The question of this debate are two. That one, why the forms of protections ought to be in forms of glorifying the struggle of those working classes. And number two, why art is a legitimate platform to deliver that particular message that opening government wants to envision. We'll tackle that issue in opening opposition. We would much rather prefer a world where you don't subsidize any forms of art that glorifies working classes. Which means to say we can defend two things. That either one, we're going to subsidize art that don't glorify those who are working class, or even if we have to go bold, we're more than willing to say that art is not a good platform to deliver the cause of the working class, because art oversimplifies the story of individuals. Art is only one picture that you cannot expect everybody will understand the struggle of the individuals on that side of the house. We don't think that their policies is going to be effective. We think that working classes suffer, that those who are lower to middle class income does not want to be in your pictures on that side of the house. In your world, you send the nuance that your struggle and your suffering is something that is worth and something that is worth fighting for. We don't think there is a way to go in this debate. Because glorification entails several things that Prime Minister does not indicate. Glorification entails that even if working class are struggling, you still end up normalizing all of those things. Glorify means that you portray something beyond the reality that is currently happening on the ground. That it says your struggle worth even though you have to struggle under the capitalistic banner. In my speech, I'll tell you why this subsidy to art that glorifies working class results into worse protections of working class. But before that, I have one independent rebuttal towards Prime Minister case. Because Prime Minister claims that it's important to have arts to unionize the relatability of individuals because art serves an exclusive functions to make people unite. We don't necessarily think that this art is one that is exclusive to unionize people. The fact that in status quo we have things like labor union that is not exclusive to unionize the relatability of individuals to participate in political campaign. But even when it comes to labor union, it's far more effective, right? Because it has a cost, it has direct cost towards government. When people protest, when people don't go to jobs, there's a direct cost for government for knowing the fact that laborers and working class are particularly contributive. When it comes to art, it is not something that gives a direct cost for people to understand the issue of laborers, ladies and gentlemen. But in your set of house, note that it's mutually exclusive to have this art, but at the same time having labor union or people campaign. Because people felt that they have contributed enough by only seeing the picture to understand the issues, as opposed to people really contributing to fight the cause of these individuals through political campaign and through advocacies for their rights. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why we would argue it's much better happen under our policy, not yet. So firstly, let's talk about why this art that glorifies the working class results into worse protections of working class to begin with. Because when we're talking about working class, we're talking about disputable issues like minimum wage, social security, which we agree with Prime Minister. The problem with subsidizing arts that are glorifying working class are two things. First of all, I'm going to tackle the fiat that Prime Minister gave to you because it is still contingent upon who is going to subsidize all of those things. Even assuming that it's government that is going to subsidize those things, it is still highly lobbied by the corporations, which means that the art that will be glorified are still art that sort of normalize their struggle, that it's okay for you to work even under the capitalistic banner. But number two, even if it's not lobbied by a company or government is good, we think that this art is still bad. Because the narrative that this art sends is that this art is very simplistic in the way it portrays the struggling class. Work, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that it was only a mere picture that is still open to interpretation, that individuals lies in spectrum. Some people might normalize and think that we shouldn't fight for their rights, and we think that it's okay for them to settle that particular minimum wage. Some people might want it to fight for you more. The fact that when it comes to art, it's open to interpretations and you glorify the causation results into individuals. Some of them demeans the value of arts on that side of the house. It oversimplifies the stories of the working class into that one particular picture. Meanwhile, the issues are very complex, that we cannot only discuss it through paint of picture, we ought to discuss it through a much more meaningful discussion that requires debate and talks between important actors in that particular regards. What this results into government team? This results into worse protections of the workers on that side of the house. Because either A, you can't demand for more wages because people understand that it's okay for you to settle for less for that particular art because people don't really relate to that particular art, or even in their side, the art will be about glorifying the characteristic of the good characteristic of working class and the importance of it. It creates huge standards and generalization of working class that all working class wanted the same, ladies and gentlemen. Meanwhile, when it comes to working class, we have spectrum. There are those who are blue collar, white collar. You generalize the interest of people on that side of the house to be portrayed in that manner. We don't think that's good to have on that side of the house. Before that, I'll take this.
So how do you kickstart any form of discussion for political change in your work?
Yeah, sure. In our proposal, we're more than willing to have two things. Either one, the art that does not glorify all of those things, or two, other platform other than art. Things like campaign, labor union, talking about those things, criticizing policies of state. These are much more important things that can result into better protections for these individuals because of the fact that the discussions are much more substantive and meaningful in comparison to a discussion that are either multi-interpretative or the discussion that are oversimplified on that side of the house. You cannot have things like data. You cannot have things like facts. Or to what sector do we ought to help in this particular picture. And it's always mutually exclusive to have this both at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, because when people continuously focus on arts per se, this discussion of arts overclouds any other discussion that are substantive and meaningful that we can get in opening opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, so we would argue it's much better to exist under our side of the house. But more importantly, we think that under your side of the house, you further antagonize the capitalistic structures, the company and the other part of this capital holder that you could have negotiated with, but because of the fact that you continuously glorify and say that it's always the fault of corporation, that it's always the fault of you, and it's our burden that needs to be shared, on your side of the house, you decrease the chances of you to be able to negotiate with this company to demand for more rights and more accountability. All of these things are far more important in comparison to a simplistic understanding of what it means to be a working class, because their struggle can just be generalized by simplistic stories on the picture that government wants to have. For these reasons, we're very proud to open this.
Senator for remarks, and invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
So I'm going to talk about two things in my speech, both of which will immediately wipe out opening opposition on that debate. Firstly, I'm going to tackle the curve that apparently the entire opposition bench from TOI wanted to engage on, in which white art should be glorified. But secondly, I'm going to talk about whether or not, if art is indeed simplified, this simplification and generalization over the working class is a necessary step to the class consciousness over a fractured working class that we've been talking about. Firstly, let's talk about why art should be glorified. Because apparently there was discussion from both opposition bands that they say the reason why art shouldn't be glorified is because it's going to damage, for instance, the relations within the working class itself, that they're not going to be aware of different and multitude level of interest that they have. But what we need to recognize is that the working class, and the reason why they should be glorified is that because they, instead of being appreciated and protected, like what they're talking about, is massively underappreciated in the status quo. While any policy that the government wanted to enact rests pretty much on the intent to increase productivity, which is targeted for the working class as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this happens in multiple nations, but even in the United States, for instance, when the minimum wage is different through states, but mostly it's around 7 to 10. If the minimum wage is actually kept up with the productivity, it should be in around of $20 per hour. But if it keeps up with inflation, it should be in around of $17. What it means is that there is a massive underappreciation even to what the working class currently deserves. Therefore, this means that one, you represent and redress the harms and the oppression to the working class that they currently experience. The notion of white trash in suburban United States, for example, ladies and gentlemen. So you rectify that because you glorify and you portray them in a good light in comparison to what they previously experienced. But not just in terms of representation, because you're also going to be able to evoke emotion through them. This is the characterization of art that they conveniently ignore, ladies and gentlemen, because what Jessica told you about evoking emotion is not just about the interest of the labor to unionize, it is also about changing the atmosphere within the country. Because when you glorify art and when you continuously see the glorification of working class, people are also going to be habituated with this notion of culture that is pro-working class. We're not saying people would change overnight, obviously, but we're saying is you're habituating them through the culture that is more compassionate to the working class. Thus, any policy and discourses that we assume both opposing government and even opposition bench wanted to have is going to manifest better on our assembly house when you habituate the individuals on the ground to actually have a proper discussion and proper addressing of grievances to the working class. No, thank you. So that answers why art that's pro-working class should be glorified. The experience of these individuals, because people are not necessarily going to read hundreds of articles of foreign affairs, for instance, in absence of this art. Therefore, you do need the habituation in terms of culture that is required. But another reason why this course is going to happen better on our side when habituation occurs to the larger part of society is because currently, the working class discussion is being curbed down and shut down by the technocrats, saying that they lack the expertise in terms of economic sector, the overall growth, for instance, that magnifies the inability of the working class to calculate the entire economic projection if they ask for more rights, for example. So being able to also habituating even more individuals in this discussion and being more compassionate to them is exactly what's going to even incentivize this course to happen, which is currently being kept down by the politicians and by medias at large. The conventional media that we think is not necessarily pro to the working class. No, thank you. Secondly, let's talk about why it needs to be simplified. Because if the answer from their side is that any form of simplification is dangerous, the only thing opening government needs to do to win this point is by recharacterizing this simplification to be something better, right? Then that's what I'm going to do. The simplification that happens through the art form, we think either A, is not necessarily going to happen in all instances. I think movies of 20 years of slave, for instance, can quite accurately depict the hardships that slaves experiences. But secondly, if it is indeed simplified, we think it's important to have individuals who are pretty much absorbed with the capitalistic system, who works 9 to 5, possibly in some instances working double jobs, for instance, in order to fulfill the need of the entire family, becoming the breadwinner of the family, to have this very simplified message. We recognize the interest of this working class might differ, but there is going to be a very specific and also going to be a set of policies that the entire working class have, and this is going to reduce the fracture in terms of the movement we have right now. That is the interest of the capitalists, right? To fracture the working class and fracture their interest, and we think to unify this interest and to find the common denominator, therefore, is massively important. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So showing them a positive and an empowering light is not one that creates the political will for your positive impacts, things like minimum wage, etc. Because they're inherently doing well.
Yeah, it's not directly going to happen, but what we're saying is you're habituating individuals who are not even compassionate to them to even be involved in a discussion. You are articulating the voices that are unable to be articulated and voiced out through the conventional medias, because the conventional medias are massively empowered by the richest, which have the interest to also empower the richest, for instance, ladies and gentlemen. So those are the policies that we think is going to be at least have better probability to be passed and proposed on our assembly house. What we envision, therefore, through the simplified form of art is going to be very likely, such as what happened through the pink tide in Latin American countries, for instance, when after art rises and after the interest from the previously right-wing governments then being criticized, then people raises up against them and rail in order to galvanize support for the working class. Policies that are more pro-left and pro-labor, ladies and gentlemen. We think that this class awareness and consciousness can only happen at the point that you simplify the messages, because that's the moment when people perceive that they have the exact same interest with the other working class, even those who come from different ethnic backgrounds, different races, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, the important thing to note here is that we need to represent the working class. We need to change the atmosphere within the country, and they have been underappreciated in the status quo. For that reason, we propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for his remarks and invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Sorry, I'm shaking. The first thing that I want to note is that opening opposition harms of the inability for you to criticize, involve or evolving the norms of the privileges of working environment is a much more significant harm than opening government saying that Spotify cannot just say to you that I feel you. Because I think that the debate should be more focused on protecting the working class of these individuals, and I think that it requires for you to debate what is glorifying working class. I think that opening government fails to do that. This is why on my street there are going to be 3 things that I'm going to elaborate. First, I'm going to elaborate what is glorifying working class and analyzing and why is it like to put glorification. Second, I'm also going to talk about the worst case, that even the best case, even if that we need to trade off pro-leftist policies that begins in opening government, that's perfectly fine trade off. Lastly, I'm also going to embolden why the ability for you to check and balances and create proper check and balances can only exist in opening positions. And from the first point, right? I think when you're talking about glorification of working class, I think that it's not only emphasizing on the oppressions and on the struggles of the working class. Most of the time, the same way, for example, when we glorify doctors, we do not glorify how hard it is to become doctors, but we glorify that doctors is a rewarding job, and it's something that is necessary within a particular part of societies. So most of the times, the characterizations of glorification that opening our government, and I think to some extent closing government into defense, are not only that these people are struggling, but these people are really in a great condition and in great circumstances that they do not need our help. Things like, for example, that becoming a doctor or becoming a secretary or becoming, I don't know, a firefighter is a rewarding job and it's not necessary for you to have money. Things like, for example, when you already graduate and become a business, that's public orders. When you're a blue-collar labor, most of the time that you are in a great condition and that is your passion to become this kind of characterization. This is the type of glorification that opening government business. I think it's a particularly important part. Why? Because the entire analysis getting check and balances and revolution for these people try to revolt and try to analyze and relate towards these struggles on the basis of these policies and that they're able to characterize what does glorification means, and when they fail to do that, I think they already lost the debate at the feet. So the second reason why this is also particularly important is because you need the reasons why this is a likely qualifications. Because if you're talking about art, sure, you're going to subsidize it towards average individuals, or for example, poor people can afford this kind of thing. But it's art, come on, it's a tertiary needs that most likely, if you're an artist, your main targets are not people who art can only relate. You need to also have money for it to survive. So most of the times, artists are also going to go towards elitists and also going to go towards, for example, rich people in order for them to get money. And most of the times, they do not want to antagonize these individuals, understand these circumstances. Most of the times, they're not going to portray the struggle of working class, but they're only going to say and glorify that becoming doctors and laborers is entirely as rewarding as people who already work in these NCOs and etc. This is why I think that their characterization of glorification should be not necessary. But even if let's engage in the characterizations of this working class are struggling, and this is the type of art that you're going to be the victim at the end. But I'm not going to talk. No, right? Alright. So there are two things that is particularly advantageous is either A, unnecessary, or too harmful to the progress that is happening with this working class. I'm going to take you at what, 5 or D. One, I think it's unnecessary to begin with. Understand the characterizations of their countries. One, everyone who says that the majority of the people right now living in these countries are the working class, and understand they are working and they are struggling and they are under oppression. Most of the times do not need certain us to realize that, hey, I am oppressed. And I think that this is the type of thing that they need to realize. That means that the relatability that they want to have are not going to go to these majority classes, but go towards the elitists and individuals at the play. And most of the times, even if you depict these struggles are struggles that are particularly going to be justified by elitist parties. Things like this are normal circumstances that is going on in the transformist societies. This is why art right now glorify these individuals at today. The second reason why this is unnecessary because they're the one who says that the government are already pro-left parties and right now already going to that particular directions. That means that you do not need much more political support for to progress pro-left policies. You do not need, for example, to create more leftist and socialist social argumentation for you to win that particular debate. We think this is what is harmful towards this characterization. There are three reasons why. Closing your I think. Yeah.
So like, how do you make the average person feel like being a trash collector is a respectable job?
I'm sorry, sir.
How do you make the average person see being a trash collector as a respectable job?
One, I think that the ability for you to create better circumstances for trash collector is a much more significant benefit than a trash collector being unappreciated. On our house, the worst case scenarios that trash collectors are not going to be appreciated by the majority, but they can say towards the government that I do not want to be a trash collector. You need to invent certain machines for you to do that, and the only way is to depict the working class is not a job that you want to have, but a job that requires you to move on from these particular things. This is why on our house, most of the times that people are likely going to say, I do not want to become a blue collar worker, I want to become a CEO. I think that there is a much more significant benefit, as you can forgo processes like subsidy, much more better education, things like, for example, having more automations in these areas and moving on to a white collar jobs. There are three reasons why this is particularly harmful to their side. One, because I think that there are three reasons why I think that opening government loses debate. One, because I think it's harmful for the progress of these of working class activity. One, I think when you take a look at economics, and I think that this is I don't think that this debate has a fiat that we need to defend working classes. That when you define economic debate, you need to see capital owners and working class not as an antagonist towards each other, as an enemy towards each other. Most of the times that they are co-dependent and one partly relies towards another. So having a pro-left and absolute pro-left policies are not inherently going to create the economic better. Sure, economic better. Most of the times when you do not have capital owners, you do not have any jobs, you do not have any employment, you do not have any working class. This is why the debate should need more focus on which one to create an accurate policies and a pro-left policies. I think that could only happen in terms of data, and this is going to be overclouded by art. They argue that how do you think that people will read foreign affairs through art? I don't think that in both sides people will read foreign affairs. But on our side of the house, data will be a much more convincing fact by news and channels and conventional media. Rather than their side, they say that I'm not going to watch this media, I'm going to only fuel my basis, only base the arts and songs that I listen to. I think this is particularly important to understand what we want to have is a working economy and not only a working class economy, right? That could only happen when you balance out these things, and that I understand we already live in a pro-left government like our opening government says. We do not need to fuel the fire that exists within this particular society. The second reason why this is important is because depicting these classes as something that is beneficial and something that is rewarding is hurtful. Because understand not everyone wants to become a working class. All of a sudden you have the chance to revolt and create check and balances to that physical conditions. We think
I'd like to thank that speaker for his remarks and thank the member of government.
Three things from our side. First, you hear why this is an urgent debate. The second thing you hear is the exact process through which we envision this change to happen, when we will speak about both the range of art that can be created and why it is likely to be provocative. Thirdly, I'll tell you why that not just gets us to the benefits, but also just a solution to all of the problems, but also unites labor groups, make art better, and all of those other things. Let's get straight to it, right? A lot of the responses will be integrated. I'll point out accordingly. The first thing that the whole debate is missing out is the fact that the history of art is mired with the murder of art that used to represent the working class. This has happened through stereotyping these kinds of art as explicitly communist. anti-capitalist, anti-productivity. That's just the first thing the whole debate never talks about. But why has that happened? Firstly, this has happened because art is often defined by the elite and consumed by the elite. It is seen as largely within their domain. The second way in which it has happened is explicitly carrying on campaigns where you denounce things such as portraying the pain people go through while working in mines, or the number of people who die in those places, or just the pain of having to carry heavy machinery, etc., as explicitly communist art, right? This is something that both democratic nations have gotten rid of, but also capitalist nations. And just the fact that it was associated with countries like Russia probably didn't help either. But the thing is, that's a process that we have suffered through. The third reason this is also true is because the art we have right now is dependent on the lived experience of artists. So, if most of the people going in Rhodes School of Art, for example, are going to be people who are privileged and not from the working class, it is a true corollary that the the art that is created will also therefore be equally highbrow and not related to the lived experiences of the working class. Often because people from working class are just having a hard time doing things like paying for a basic education, paying for a productive education like maybe law or finance, it means they don't enter these areas. So that's the third reason why naturally it doesn't happen. But the fourth reason why it also doesn't happen is the big history of how art was supported in the past, right? So it's not just the fact that it was the Medici, but it's also the fact that it was the neo-millionaires and billionaires who sanctioned which art should be created and which art they picked up upon and is most important. Those are all the reasons why this debate needs to happen. At the very least, this argument proves to you that there's a need for redress. But more importantly, this is true because humanizing the working class is critical in a world where in the next 25 years, 60% jobs will be lost to things like mechanization and automation. And that's where working class will suffer the most because they have no skills in those areas. But consider the political reality, where there's not a single country that is proposing things like UBI or just significant redress when these jobs are lost. This means the people in this room and our lived realities are so different from people in slums, in working class, that there needs to be very strong evocative and provocative art to bridge the gap and start talking about how to solve those problems. This is why the first extension is important. The second extension is the process through which we envision this will happen. The first way in which this will happen is very clear, right? We change who creates art, as in encouraging artists from working class. We also literally like giving them more grants, etc. means even people who probably didn't take an art degree but probably have some capacity will literally go and try to create more of these. It also means that artists will try to create more of those arts. So we change that. The second thing we change is where this art is displayed, right? So for example, we probably envision this art to be displayed in factory walls. Often these will look like beautiful graffitis. These are things we see, for example, envisioned as walking galleries. So for example, when the working class people are walking from neighborhood to their bus stop, these are places where we can display these arts. This is important because it means that there is a whole world of imagination that this side wants you to forget exists in terms of ways in which we can art more real but also relatable. The second way in which we assume that will happen is probably talking about things that unites us. For example, talking about how the working class is the backbone, how they have, for example, supported revolutions in the past and literally spilled their blood. Thirdly, glorifying not just the hard work they do but also everything else. But this also means that the differential in real life is when news pieces pick those things up. There's a lot more natural discussion. Why is that more likely to happen? Because BuzzFeed and New York Times both want more light. They want more reshares. They want to upsell these pieces of news. They want to keep talking about these things. And that's why Khalis's POI is wrong. I mean, newspapers don't want to talk about art in a way that there's no staying power to those discussions. So that's the second argument is there's a natural incentive for news pieces and organizations to pick up these pieces of art and create huge discussion when there's an active process of incentivizing them. The third way in which we envision this to happen is simply, and I think this is offensive, the fact that the working class people don't just live a life of pain. They live a complex life, right? So what does it mean? It means, for example, in South Africa, you can glorify the sneaker culture that is prevalent in working class communities, which is beautiful as a resort that they have created to the pains of not having enough money. Secondly, this can be stories of upward mobility. Thirdly, this can be stories of potential, like our next Einstein is in a slum somewhere in Delhi and a piece of art that really portrays that. Fourthly, things like the rickshaw puller in Bangladesh who turned into a tree hugger and started saving trees simply because he can. We think there are stories of beauty and potential within working class communities on top of of course, all the stories of pain. This means these stories are likely to be complex, evocative, and inspiring. So that's the third way in which we can envision that case. Yes, sir.
The entire case coming from closing government assumes that people in the working class derive catharsis from art subsidized by the government. Untrue, because the people from the working class derive catharsis from their own art. The we think is in fact blunted by government subsidy.
No one cares if Banks is creating graffiti based on UK government's grants or Banks is creating graffiti by himself. That argument simply makes no sense, right? But fourthly, I'll tell you exactly why. Right? So for example, often this art is shock provocative. Right after the Bengal premise, the great artist Joshimuddin, for example, in the Indian subcontinent, created this piece of art where there was a dumpster and a kid and vultures. I don't need to explain to you what that art means right after a famine. We think that's the kind of art that can also be created that just leaves no room for misinterpretation and more discussion about the pains that people go through. This means we're the first thing to mechanize why there will be more empathy, why there will be more humanization, but thirdly and very importantly, at the very least, working class people themselves uniting, talking about these pains. This means the garment factory working class people and the sewer working class people finally have something common to get to because they're being displayed in the same walking gallery, because they're being displayed in the same kinds of graffitis. This means at the very least, they are more united. What does it mean? It means not just that art, not just immediate benefit, but also the fact that art now has a bigger support base. Artists are more diverse. It democratizes access to art. The world is far better when art is richer. And it's not richer if you don't count in the experience of most people. Thank you.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their remarks and invite the member of opposition.
Karl Marx may have said that religion is the opium of the masses. We in closing government, closing opposition, posit that art may just well be that same heroin. They may just well be the same drug that places us to idealize oppression even in the face of it. They may well be the same drug that empowers the ruling class to oppress the working class under the notion that it is truly happiness. I'm going to do three things in closing opposition. First, let me clear up what the comparative in this debate actually is. It was never about an existence of art in their side and no art on the outside of the house. Secondly, I'm going to just dissect who actually empowers the working class. Thirdly, I'm going to explain why art that glorifies the working class empowers populist politicians whose rhetoric often do not actually represent what the working class needs. First, what a comparative is in this debate. Note that this directly clashes with closing government's extension, where they talk about how art is in and of itself important for the working class. They need to be represented. If you can prove to you that there's still some form of representation on the outside of the house, crucially, that it gets worse when involved with government subsidy, that's enough to take away closing government in this debate. First, why does art still exist on the outside of the house? Because we say there still exists art that represents the working class that do not involve government subsidy. What are those things? These things such as graffitis on trade unions, which were imposed by the working class. It's just things such as like slave folk songs that spread by word of mouth. It's things such as urban music spread by CDs and mixtapes, which do not involve government resources. You don't require these funds to be able to make sure these things are more powered because these things already exist. But, crucially, we have to recognize that the working class are empowered by rebellion, i.e. the ability to look at the government and feel as if they are the ones who are taking away your rights. And crucially, that's the reason why closing government's comparative doesn't work in this debate. Because people recognize that you're being funded by the government, people recognize that art is now diluted and influenced by the fact that it's involved with governmental hands. So they are less likely to be empowered by those forms of art. Crucially, on the other side of the house, they have diluted the market by the fact that you subsidize these forms of art that people don't literally feel as if they are empowered by. Secondly, why is that nature of rebellion blunted by subsidy? Because firstly, we see art perceptually is only empowering if it involves the notion of purity. As I alluded to earlier, because the perception is that it's involved with the people who oppress you, with the people who are lobbied by the interests that opening opposition suggests, then the perception is unlikely to be empowering. Secondly, if the government subsidizes you, it also looks like restrictions on what art you can bear and where you portray that art. It looks like graffiti in special zones. It looks like graffiti inside the factories as opposed to outside the factories, which is more like fuck you in a way. It's those kinds of art that's more empowering. Thirdly, the government gets to control what kind of art is more portrayed. And crucially, if you buy opening opposition's characterization that they're often lobbied by interest, it also means that they give certain art more credit. They give art that already that's likely to keep the working class blunted more money, and that's likely to give art that truly empowers the working class more money. The reason why this is important is because sure, they may get art, but we question the empowering nature of that art given the comparative already exists. Secondly, who empowers the working class? We see that glorification inherently idealizes the suffering of that working class. And to answer that question, we have to discuss what the nature of glorification is. It is beyond happiness, as opening opposition suggests. It is beyond worth. What it truly is tags a certain situation as ideal. It tags the situation as happiness. What this looks like is you glorify the minimum wage, and that's fine, living through that minimum wage, because it's just part of the struggle of being a working class. You glorify horrible socio-economic conditions because it's truly part and parcel of what it means to be part of the working class. Crucially, this means that certain emotions are likely to be evoked under the other side of the house. If you buy all sides' characterizations that art engages with the emotional core, we question that power to the extent that that emotional core is framed in such a way that makes that life worth living. What is the comparative though on the outside of the house? The comparative is anger, i.e. distaste at the fact that you are suffering, distaste at your situation. And know that this exists under outside the house already when people are angry at the fact that they don't get minimum wage. What does anger do that glorification can never do? First, anger means you have the emotional pressure to show up to protest when it rains, when you're being shot at tear gas. The anger pushes you to be able to fight through those notions. Second, the sense of injustice at the situation, the fact that you're denied something that you should be given. Those things only exist crucially in a world where you don't glorify that situation. That's why you need to supercharge social movements, because on the other side of the house they keep people complacent. Now, engaging with their opening government, when they say that people need to understand and this affects the political change as well. Firstly, as I alluded to earlier, you don't need art, you already have visceral images of suffering. They already resonate with people visually, i.e. children working long hours in Bangladesh. There's already sufficient coverage, maybe not conventional media, already media that exists under the status quo. Secondly, on discourse, we argue that discourse already involves the working class, and we don't see a reason why we do have to engage with conventional media to get those rights. There's things such as social media, for example, Twitter, Facebook, which often fuel discourse that exists, which often are accessible to people from the working class who don't have the funds to be able to influence conventional media. Firstly though, the comparative on the other side of the house is far less people participate in that discourse because more people are already happy and don't feel a need to change those things. But secondly, there's already space to claim that these people are happy, and people are less likely to join them, people are less likely to believe that it's an important thing that needs to be redressed because people are generally more happy about those things. So on one side of the house, or you get people who go like, I'm really happy about this thing because of the way the art glorifies it. On the outside of the house, you get people angry at the fact that they're given something that is inherently wrong. Closing.
All endowment organizations are run by...
Sorry, just the first thing you said.
All endowment organizations are run by respectable artists. Even if that changes, why does it not mean that due to the bigger market for art which you consider to there will be rebellious art?
Sure. Here's what a respectable artist is under status quo. It is a respectable artist, an artist that engages in highbrow art. It is an artist that has already garnered reputation in the art industry. It is not an artist that goes out in factories and sprays graffiti. It is not an artist that's truly empowering in terms of bridging the emotional gap between art and the people who need it. Next thing on populist politicians. This debate isn't a vacuum. What happens in 2018? We see an increase of far-right movements that claim to represent the working class, but in reality engages in policies that hurt them. That's why when Donald Trump claims to represent the working class, the factory workers and coal miners sang, "Do you hear the people sing?" while actually thinking that Donald Trump was working in their interest. And that's what the nature of the emotional core often forces you to do. Because art by nature is vague, and that meaning can be misdirected. The movement can be misdirected. The reason why it's important in this debate is because even if they get a group that is empowered, that utilizes, that coalesces, the meaning of that, the fact that now people view things from an emotional lens as opposed to a rational lens, means that that can be misdirected for pernicious aims. Very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for his remarks and invite the government whip.
there are a few metrics in which you can evaluate this. The first, who creates significant changes when it comes to things like, for example, representation, but more importantly, it is the team that mechanizes how that discussion happens. Because I agree, opening government says discussion might happen, but I bet like the judges are unsure what is discussion happen and how does it necessarily change. The gatekeepers of power, i.e. things like, for example, politicians in addition, it also become things like employers who often are the ones who are the most important because these are the ones who hold control over the everyday lives and the living conditions and the working conditions of those individuals. I'm going to do a few things in my speech. The first, I'm going to analyze the opening halves of the debate and tell you why it's a closing debate at the end of the day. I got you, bro. Number two, and most importantly, right, we'll directly engage with closing opposition and tell you why, even if we have to trade off things, for example, things like a sense of rebelliousness, but in addition, notice the comparative in closing opposition is that most of the arts that are created in closing opposition happens in closed communities, oftentimes far away from the average individual, i.e. places from New York and the city centers where oftentimes political power holds in those areas. We'll trade that off at the very beginning. No, thank you. So first, let's analyze opening opposition first. Opening opposition suggests, guys, it's more likely that in a world where you glorify, you are going to oversimplify things and hence it becomes unnuanced. I guess the first is that opening government sort of dealt with this by saying that art isn't just paintings, it's oftentimes things like documentaries and movies that still exist. In addition, closing opposition tells you, oftentimes, like things, for example, news outlets and channels that oftentimes write articles about these arts and oftentimes make complex and nuanced discussions of these things are kick-started in a world in which you then create these arts and make this more in abundance. And hence it means that in a world where you do this, you then kick-start that discussion even better. And we say this analysis is more important as opposed to opening government because oftentimes the average individual more likely going to read those magazines is usually on the streets and so on and so forth. In addition, it's oftentimes perpetuated in social media when people share links and articles within their friends, and hence it means you galvanize more of that discussion at the very end of the day. So maybe in the best case scenario, it is oversimplified, but it kickstarts the creation of nuance in the very future. So at that point, it then does not happen. Then opening government says, guys, we'll create discussion, but maybe it's true discussion happens, but zero analysis as to how this changed the calculus of the gatekeepers of power. What do we say in closing opposition and closing government? The first, oftentimes when you put in things like the art galleries within the walkways, right, your employees are still going to walk through those things as well. Maybe maybe in the initial start they won't necessarily want to care, but oftentimes when things become repetitive for these individuals, oftentimes they then start to realize maybe there are some credence. Then they start to read more onto this, and this kickstarts a lot of discussions about the employers. Why is this important? Opening government says, guys, we make it habitual, but like this doesn't necessarily change the calculus of individuals. We say we create more empathy for the individuals of the gatekeepers of power, because once you see things, for example, struggles, it's oftentimes because it's so unrelatable. Only when you considerably put these images into the minds of these individuals by displaying them more, it is when you create the empathy that is necessary for the employers to do things, for example, maybe slightly raise up your wages or maybe make you give better working conditions at the end of the day, right? That meant that the closing half was more nuanced and telling you the mechanistic ways in which we change certain things at the very end. Let's engage with closing opposition then. A few things. They tell you, guys, art for the working class exists in closed communities. I tell you, this comparative is horrible. Why? Oftentimes when you create it in closed communities, the stigma that is oftentimes attached with these closed communities these are, for example, very small deeming groups of individuals, and oftentimes these are lowly individuals. The kinds of depictions that Shita told you in closing governments were, when we say these are oftentimes anti-capitalist, these are unproductive individuals. That's why they live in the slums and the streets, and oftentimes you put those types of stigmas onto them. We say this comparative is bad for the calculus of the average individual, because oftentimes it means I'm less likely going to care for you, and it means that, for example, the stigma oftentimes pushes away interactions from the average individual and then putting them into those closed communities. That meant that it's harder to create any form of political change of the average individual when you only confine the art into closed communities in closing opposition's work. Number two, they also say that any attempts to make any value in these closed communities are oftentimes cut down by similar reasons that I told you before, because it seems bad, because it seems associated with lower class citizens at the end of the day. Hence it means those who are at the gatekeepers of power won't change. What does it look like then later? What does it look like then for closing government's work? It means that the people in New York are able to see the imagery that more likely means that they're going to translate this into the votes that exist in our. It's more likely interactions are more likely going to happen, because it means that the person in New York and the person who is living in the slums, when they have commonality between each other, creates that interactions as opposed to putting that interaction within this sort of house. Sure.
stigma will exist on both sides of the house because on both sides of the house, you're still empowering and glorifying the lower class. On the outside of the house, you ensure purity. Can you engage with that?
Our number one, fuck purity. Number two, we break that stigma by creating interactions when these two groups have a commonality in order for them to interact. This side of the house doesn't have any incentive for the average person in New York to engage with the average individual within Islam and get to. No, thank you. But then they say, guys, but the information and the content is going to be controlled. The first, I think it's fairly enough for opening up and for Gov to say that we can fiat this to say it's unconditional in terms of its content. So I disagree with this area at the end of the day. But number two, we'll tell you why we'll trade this off, because we say that in a world in which you put it under the banner of the state, oftentimes the average individual who is less likely to consume that art will see this art as legitimate. That meant that on the comparative, they'll only see that this art is bad art, it's graffiti. It's like you shouldn't talk with these individuals, as opposed to one which is legitimized by the state. More individuals are more likely going to feel that this is an okay version of art. But then they say, guys, but it's important to have some version of rebelliousness and anger. The first of which is that no reason as to why, when we can make it unconditional, the content feels rebellious and anger. I think the content is sufficient enough for people to rile up because it's visual as opposed to the intention. In addition, oftentimes individuals don't think that deep. They see an imagery that is very rebellious. It's sufficient enough for them to spark some versions of rebelliousness, even if it's attached to the state at the back of their heads. Lastly, right, we say even if we have to trade off some versions of rebelliousness, we say that's particularly fine, because we say oftentimes it means it's easier for individuals within the working class to feel like they can actually work with the state, because it means that the state is not funding things which are fundamental onto them. It's easier for these two groups to then work together. It means that, for example, social movements have more of an incentive to talk to politicians and try to, like, for example, garner their support in order for them to make any versions of change. Lastly, right, they say, oh, but guys, populist narratives, it's symmetrical at both sides of the house. If it means that art still exists in this side of the house, those populist politicians still would attach it. We say it becomes even worse because you now create more powerful versions of right-wing populism because it's now put into Islam. We say on that comparative, we would rather make it more visible in our side of the house.
Once again, that speaker for their remarks, and invite the opposition whip to close opposition's case and leave the round.
People like Che Guevara and Castro brothers glorify the working class, which is where most of their political clout comes from. It doesn't create changes in the way they, it doesn't create changes in their condition. All it does is create complacency. Social movements need a form of anger to try and change this. It does not happen the point in time in which you allow these same elites to use this art to actively abuse these individuals or keep their conditions the same. Three things in my speech. Firstly, discourse. Secondly, empowerment. Thirdly, I'll deal with the government. Firstly, on discourse. Let's talk about what the whip said right before. He said that that the kind of closed art that we are advocating for is one that is likely to be stigmatized by this community, i.e., for example, art that is confined to specific communities. Firstly, you don't eradicate stigma either, because if this is so look, the stigma will still exist in as far as these people are actively advocating for better conditions. Better conditions mean asking for more rights, meaning to say that you inherently are always in conflict with other classes within society. This class warfare will always ensure that the lower class will remain stigmatized even under your side. There is no mechanization you have that can possibly change this in as far as asking for more right inherently is something that somebody else would not want. That class conflict still exists. Secondly, what do you mean fuck purity? Purity is arguably the most empowering thing for these communities when it comes to their art. Why is this necessary? necessarily true. Because firstly, even if that art is stigmatized by other people, it doesn't matter. Because if you have full control over that art, that is arguably the most powerful thing for these communities. The last thing you want is an elitist government choosing the kind of art that can and cannot be celebrated on a day-to-day basis. If these individuals have full control over the nature of this art, where it can be placed, I would argue that is the far more important thing for these communities. Secondly, they said that you get empathy because elitists will get day-to-day interaction with this art and it becomes a repetitive thing, and hence that's how you close the gap between these individuals. Not necessarily true, because the individuals that are going to be advocating for, the individuals that are going to fund this art are literally it's the same government that is lobbied by the very same elites who need an unempowered working class for a day-to-day basis, meaning to say that those individuals, given that their lobbying is what the government relies on a very large extent, these individuals still get to define the boundaries of that art. So if they know that your repetitive interactions means that lower class individuals get to ask for better rights, hence make things inherently more expensive for them, then they're obviously not going to want that art to be placed in areas where you have day-to-day interactions with people. They would want that art placed in areas where you can keep the working class submerged in horrible conditions. So these same individuals that are lobbying are the same people that are likely to make sure that that art remains inherently restrictive. This was something they did not engage with and had to do so in order for that argument to fly in this debate. Secondly, on empowerment, sit down. There are two things that they take away from these individuals. Firstly is the power, secondly is the anger that these communities need to try and ask for better conditions. The nature of this issue and who gets to win this is exactly how much control, who gets to give these communities more control and better conditions at the end of the day. Firstly, power is something that you're taking away from these communities. If these communities, in many cases, are being extremely restrictive in the way in which their art gets portrayed, if rich elites are the ones that get to choose where this art can and cannot be portrayed, in that case, it's going to be inherently restrictive. You don't necessarily get the power. Secondly, if they already concede that purity is not necessarily a good thing, you are taking away the most amount of power these communities have over their own art. So the most honest portrayals of their day-to-day lives is something that they get taken away from them in the point in time in which you have restrictive forms of art that governments are funding. Secondly, anger. Note that social movements don't need complacency. In the point in which you are actively advocating, the point in which you are actively empowering this narrative, you are trying to show it in a good light, or at least you are trying to show their day-to-day lives as something that is meaningful and strong and empowering. These communities don't need that. It was the same thing that happened in Latin America, where they were under the illusion that they're living okay lives because governments actively had banners that were showing, in a communist government, that individuals who are working class people are powerful and people who are societies heavily depend on. This created a situation where they were under the impression that the government cares about them and everyone cares about them. They were still subjected to horrible conditions. What do they need now to change this? They need anger. They need a reality check that the ways in which they are living today is unacceptable and horrible. They need to be able to step out of these oppressive situations that they're stuck in. How do they then do this? They then do this when social movements are aware of this fact and use that anger to capitalize on that anger and actively revolt for better conditions. That does not happen when the state is actively funding art that is shown, in most places, advertisements, banners, and CGs, newspaper agencies, are actively telling individuals that this is an alright form of way to live, or this is a respectable way to live. A trash collector does not need that form of respect. They need to understand that their conditions are bad, and they need to have that anger to try and actively fight for better situations. That does not happen when every newspaper agency everywhere is advocating that this is a good thing. Why is that necessarily true? Because firstly, you are changing the public psyche as to what the working class is going through on a day-to-day basis, meaning to say that the political will for people to want to engage in that movement remains inherently low insofar as the public at large is convinced that that is inherently a good thing. Secondly, the form of art that these communities would have otherwise shown is one that is more realistic and likely to garner change. Before that, I'll take opening.
On OG, we have tell you that the internal working class community, there's lack of class unity consciousness. On our side, we prove to you how more art means more exposure. The entire op bench has not negated that class consciousness is a problem in this debate.
Okay, look, class consciousness is obviously a problem, right? And that exists on many spectrums. But the fact of the matter remains is that nobody on your side actually solves this insofar as that stigma still exists against this class. There was no mechanization of processes through which advocating their conditions does indeed change this. So there's literally no positive impact pertaining to this that they're talking about. Lastly, OG talked about habituation and better image, everything, right? So basically all sorts of positive impacts that assume that the point in time in which you have this art advertised everywhere, you lead various different and positive impacts. It does not necessarily happen. Why is this the case? I think they cited the exact examples for why this does not happen, Latin America. The point in time in which the government actively funds art that shows that these conditions are good, it creates a complacency at large when it comes to the general public. Insofar as the public is not made aware of horrible conditions that these people are going through, or the fact that these lives are inherently unrespectable in the ways in which, like, they have to go through in a day-to-day life, i.e. payments and everything like that, you don't actually get the kinds of change that you claim that you were trying to mechanize at the end of this debate. Ultimately, this debate comes down to one thing, and that is, two things. Firstly, that true empowerment comes when you have full control over the nature of the art that is portrayed. Insofar as you have restrictive art that is funded by the government for all these reasons that we have told you, you don't get the positive impacts that they're talking about. Secondly, true empowerment comes when they are awake and not under the impression that the conditions that they're living in are acceptable. That is what social movements need to capitalize on to get better conditions. For all these reasons, supremely proud to oppose.
Let's thank the last speaker.